I am delighted to interview and to share with you this time a conversation with Kwok Pui Lan, who is one of the preeminent theologians of our generation. Since the statement was released on Tuesday, more than 7,000 have signed it, and today is Friday, so this is it's a pretty amazing development over the last 3 years. So for this time, we'd like to also give a chance for some of the people who've signed it to share a little bit about why they signed it and tell us a little bit of background. So Kwok Pui Lan, this is a wonderful opportunity. Pui Lan, I remember my first memory of connecting with you was back in late 80s. I think you were finishing up your dissertation, and I was also a doctoral student at Union Theological Seminary, and we met at the seminary library. So it's good to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It is so wonderful to see you, Tim. And I signed the statement because I think that it is very urgent and timely. I have been watching the growing cases of anti-Asian racism in the United States and also in other parts of the world. In early March, I was in London attending a conference. At that time, people in London were not paying so much attention to the pandemic. But there was one incident that I remembered so clearly. I was on the subway, and then there was an older English gentleman who kept staring at me. I felt very uncomfortable because I was thinking, is it because I am Chinese or look like an Asian that he was staring at me? And even here in Atlanta, I noticed that when I took a walk in the park, there will be people who step aside when I was passing by. Again, I do not know whether this is racism or whether it is because they want to practice social distancing. So from my own experience, that I know this kind of anti-Asian racism or microaggression is very real. And then when I watch what has been happening, for example, people being beat up in Europe and also in the United States and other racial incidents, that I know that this kind of discrimination and racism is very much on the rise. So a statement to put out to the Asian American communities, to the Christian wider communities, and to the whole nation as a whole, calling attention to what is happening to our community is very important.
Thank you. How do you understand the moment that we are in right now, particularly as an Asian and for Asian Americans?
I have been linking this to the competition between the United States and China. As you know that in the last 2 years, there have been intense conversation on the trade wars between the two countries. And not only that, last fall, you may recall that we had the protest going on in Hong Kong, where I was born. So I was watching that very closely, and then the pandemic came earlier in this year. So I have been watching about the Sino-American relations and the tension between the two superpowers of our time. The pandemic really then challenged the status quo of the world. And so many people are suffering because of the pandemic, but it took place, at least in this beginning, in that tense talk or conversation between two big empires of our time.
Yes, indeed. I think that too often Asian Americans are caught in the middle of these geopolitical conversations or conflicts, and Chinese, Japanese, and other Asian Americans have often been victimized by that, in addition to the history of American racism. So thank you for sharing your perspectives of that. If I can shift gears, would you be willing to share a little bit about your personal journey and how you came to where you are today?
Sometimes when I tell them I am an Anglican and a Christian, people will ask questions. How did you become a Christian? So I want to share that beginning. When I was about 12 years old, a neighbor of mine who belongs to an Anglican church in Hong Kong brought my elder sister and me to the Anglican church. So I became an Anglican when I was in my teenage years. And then I had the privilege of having a woman pastor in my church who later became one of the two pioneering women priests in the whole Anglican communion. So when I began my theological journey, way back when I was in college, I have been thinking about women's positions in the society and Christianity. And I was interested in contextual theology, that is theology's relations to politics and the social environment, and a woman's position in society for a very long time. And then since 1997, Hong Kong was returned by the British government to China. I have been intensely working on postcolonial theology. That is to imagine what would the Christian need to say during this time of political transition. So today, I continue to do this work to bring to our consciousness transnational relations across the Pacific. We cannot just do theology, just focusing on the North American side without taking into consideration its intense relationship, if not contestation or conflict, with some of the countries in Asia, which has been going on for some time.
Thank you for that. Indeed, even my own work owes a large debt to you and your perspective, because even though I have been focusing mostly on Chinese and Asian Americans, I realize that just looking at us as an ethnic group within the United States can't be done without looking at the larger picture, the diasporic and trans-Pacific reality. So I really appreciate your work for making sure and reminding all of us that we belong to a large global reality. So if I can share with the rest of our audience a little bit about your work, and then maybe ask you to say a little bit more about how you think your work can impact the next generation. Here, just for those of you who are listening, Kwok Pui Lan has written over 20 books, and the first one that is still useful to me was her dissertation entitled Chinese Women in Christianity Between 1860 to 1927. And for me as a historian, this still remains a very useful and important study for the history of Christianity in China. And then she went into the study of biblical hermeneutics, Discovering the Bible in the Non-Biblical World, published in 1995. Let me just keep reading this. Introducing Asian Feminist Theology in 2000, Postcolonial Imagination and Feminist Theology in 2005, Globalization, Gender and Peace Building, Occupy Religion. So indeed, you are one of the preeminent theologians of our time. So let me ask you then, maybe wrap up our time together. What would you say to the next generation of Christians, both lay Christians and those who are aspiring to become theologians, who are Asians and Asian Americans? Or do you have any reflections or advice to share with the next generation?
Thank you very much. I think scholarship is not done for an individual or just for our church community. It must be done in the public square now, because we are called upon as Christians to address major concerns of humankind. And this pandemic is just the beginning for us to think about the global community. And then certainly we need to address climate change and climate justice in a much more profound way. So my work has been trying to push the boundaries. And when I wrote the book, Discovering the Bible in the Non-Biblical World, there were not many resources to think about the Bible from outside the North American or European context, but from an Asian context. And then when I was writing the book that you mentioned, Chinese Women and Christianity, I was trying to think about the agency of Chinese Christian women. And then when I was doing this postcolonial imagination and feminist theology, I was asking questions coming from the global South. How do we do feminist theology, advocating women's dignity and freedom from a global dimension? So I would like to say my work has been always communal. I have not just written books. In fact, I edited more books. And so I want to build up a community of discourse, a community that is concerned with justice and that is spiritually grounded. I believe Jesus Christ's gospel is important for the whole world, and we must have the whole world in mind in our thinking about the good news and also in our thinking about Christian faith. So my hope is the next generation will do some of the things that my generation will have never imagined, that they will chart new territories and dare to take the vision even further, to help their religious community to address some of the most urgent questions of humankind and the survival of the planet.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Amen to that. I've noted that Asian women are 3 times more likely to experience their anti-racist incidents, at least based on the recent survey and data. So this is such a timely message that justice is not just only for one small group, but it's for women, for the globe, and for the entire world. So thank you for your encouragement. Do you have any questions or any last thing you want to share with our audience?
I think that we need to speak out more because we have been labeled as the model minority, meaning that we do not protest and then we just will suffer. And then with this microaggression, we doubt ourselves first because some of us come from the shame culture. I must have done something wrong instead of looking at the issues systemically. And then, so with those incidents that I mentioned earlier, this happens to everybody. Never mind whether you are a professor, you are a student, or you are a working class person. We as a community need to speak out more and also to work with other racial minorities to address the challenges of our time.
Thank you so much, Professor Kwok Pui Lan, for joining us and sharing your thoughts and indeed your words of encouragement for the future generations. I want to appreciate all that you've done, and if you can just close by just saying a few words about where you are now, and then we'll conclude our time. And what are you studying? I mean, what are you researching, or what are you teaching?
Yes, I am thinking of how to respond to the changing geopolitical situation of Asian Pacific. So I am co-editing a book that is talking about the Hong Kong protests and political theology. And I have begun a new project that will bring postcolonial insights to talk about power and politics.
Thank you so much for your time. God bless you.
Thank you.